Hello. Today I would like to talk about Arcane Mages in Phase 3 and give some updates about findings that I've found. So on screen right now is the roughly 3-minute BIS list that I came out with in my previous video. And in that video I estimated that the Exalted Trinket would have a 60% uptime on bosses. And now we have some information to determine if my guess was right. So this week there's a mage in my guild that reached Exalted. I'm still like 3,000 rep off, so I'll be testing it next week, but we can look at his logs. So here's a short fight, first boss of Hyjal. He got a little bit lucky on crits. Typically an Arcane Mage would probably crit around 43% or so a little bit high. But we'll look at the uptime of the trinket. So for comparison purposes, this is the 4-piece tier 5, which pretty much always has an 80+% upgrade, and it procs off of critting, just like the Exalted Trinket. So this is 86%, again a little bit high because he got lucky on crits, but the trinket had a 66% uptime. So this is insanely high. If he got this lucky on all bosses, that's basically 66% of a 9.3% haste buff. So if you look at the trinket, instead of reading whatever it says, you can basically read this, if he was that lucky, as saying this trinket grants you 90 haste rating. So if it read like that, people would have this on their BIS lists. Currently, for some reason, they have Skull of Gul'dan on it. I think Skull of Gul'dan is bad, and this is way better. Except for like extremely short fights, or if you have 2 Innervates. If it read, you always have 90 spell haste rating, people would think that's insane. People would be like, wow, that's like having the haste rating equivalent to 3 rings, or that's like having the equivalent haste rating of 2 Zardoons, or 1.7 Zardoons, or whatever the math is. How this trinket gets even more insane is this could also read you have 145 spell haste rating all the time on trash. So we'll look at trash logs. This is Hyjal, first 2 bosses including trash. This is, again, just for comparison purposes, this is the T5 4-piece, 83%. It's not higher than that because you drink in between, but what's your guess on the trash percent for the trinket? Drum roll. 77%. So because Arcane Explosion hits 10 mobs, and it has a chance to crit on all those 10 mobs, it has 100% uptime on trash, basically. So looking back, instead of reading whatever it says, it could also read on single target fights you have 90 spell haste. And then another line, on AoE fights you have 145 spell haste. If this trinket read what it does, technically, but I guess it's too complicated for people to understand, people would go crazy for this trinket. This trinket is insane, like bonkers nuts, crazy, insane, like 40% better than any other trinket in the game. It's disgusting. And somehow people haven't realized that or didn't realize that. But whatever, I'm here to give you that information. So I've been talking about, okay, this was a lucky fight, so we had 66% uptime. What's an unlucky fight? So here's an unlucky fight. He only crit 39%, which is like 5%, 4% lower than average. So buff uptimes were lower. This should be around in the 80s. It was 76. And then the trinket was as low as 51%. So you can get unlucky, sure. It doesn't have a 100% chance to proc when you crit. It's a 50% chance. But yeah, so let's say if you don't hit the breakpoint, which I'll talk about in a sec, this trinket can have an uptime of between 51% and 66%. So now let's talk about the breakpoint. So like I said in my previous video, to maximize this insane trinket, you will want spell haste enough to cast 4 Arcane Blasts within this 5-second window. How you get that is by having a lot of haste. So bracers, belt, double ring, and weapon will put you at 170, and then if you add on top 145 from this proc, on top of this 170, you will, I don't know, have around like 20% spell haste, which will allow you to cast 4 Arcane Blasts within this 5 seconds. If you reach this breakpoint, your unlucky will go from 50%, I haven't tested it, but these are my guesses, I was right before, so we'll see. It'll go from 50% unlucky fights to whatever, 66 unlucky fights to 72%. But then on lucky fights, you'll probably have this on 80% uptime. So it gets even better once you hit these breakpoints. And if I thought it's insane now, once you hit this breakpoint, at least for a single target, it's going to be even more insane. So, yeah. Skull of Gul'dan somehow brainwashed a bunch of people into thinking it's good. Not so much. Unless it's a 1 minute fight, 1.5 minute fight, whatever. Next, I will talk about an update to Fire Mages. So, I also predicted that Fire Mages aren't going to be good. For some reason, there was a lot of people saying that Fire Mages weren't going to be good in this tier because they're getting spell haste and they're getting they can actually equip their tier 6. Turns out that was not the case. So here's a guy on the Chinese server that his guild funneled him all the gear that he wanted. He's a fire mage, and he's got pretty much all the gear, like I said, that he wants. So look at his damage. Well, let's look at his gear first. So this is, what, 2-3 weeks into the phase. He has 4-piece tier 6, a new amulet, new bracers, new rings, Skull of Gul'dan, again, okay, and Zardu. So this guy's pretty much Abyss. He's a fire mage, so he should be doing a ton of damage, right? He has haste. He's got 3 of the things that people were saying that he needed. And he's doing 2k damage. I mean, that seems decent, I guess. But it's not. So, he did 2k DPS, but he almost got beat by an Arcane Mage, parsing 72. I mean, decent, not great though. But the Arcane Mage had 13 less eye levels and has multiple Kael'thas items equipped. So, this Fire Mage, compared to a intermediately performing, low-geared Arcane Mage, and they're pretty close. So, in my opinion, this is definitive proof that Fire Mage is terrible. Again, this is kind of a low sample size, but not when you look at everything. So, here's the first 2 weeks of the phase. Fire Mages, this is the 99 percentile, so in this 99 percentile, if people were to receive Zarduns or Skull of Gul'dans or 4-piece tier 6, they would show up in this 99 percentile, 100% percentile, whatever. They should be showing up in this number. And they are. But they're, what, 400 DPS behind an Arcane Mage at similar parses. So, I predicted that Fire Mages weren't going to be good because, similar to Warlocks, when you receive haste on your gear, it's replacing something. And it's pretty much always replacing crit chance. So, since Fire Mages like crit, because they depend on ignites and crits and whatever, if they're losing crit for haste, even if haste is a better stat, they're losing a good stat for a good stat. Whereas Arcane Mages, crit isn't really that good. So Arcane Mages lose crit for haste. That's a net positive. They're losing a bad stat for a good stat. But also, Warlocks, I think they're not going to be that great either. People are saying Warlocks are going to beat Arcane Mages. That's not the case either. So it's a similar thing. people were saying, oh, now they get haste, now they get a good set bonus. Okay, cool, whatever. But similar to fire mages, they're replacing crit with haste. Replacing a good stat with a good stat, you're not going to improve your overall damage that much. So yeah, if you are holding on fire stocks and destruction stocks, sell them, because they're not going to be good this phase, and they're not going to be good in Sunwell. That is my prediction. You can hold me to it. One last thing, I guess 2 things. So, I suggest the breakpoint. Again, this is if your guild is semi-decent, pretty good, and fights are on average 2.5 minutes to 3.5 minutes. You have all this haste. But Council and Illidan are longer fights, and I don't necessarily suggest all this haste unless you have 2 Innervates, which pretty much no one has, or shouldn't have, because that's dumb. But for these 2 fights that last, I don't know, 4 to 7 minutes long, whatever, you should unequip your haste pieces for crit pieces, or basically pieces that don't have haste on it. So change out your bracers, belt, and ring for just crit spirit stuff. So that's what I suggest. All the other items remain the same. It should be an easy switch. If you are limited on gear, I would go for the haste gear first, just because, I don't know, haste is more fun, and you're going to do more damage on most fights. It's just going to be the longer fights you're going to do less damage on. In addition, even if your gear set is just pure haste and you can't have all the items in the game, if you're going into fights like Council or Illidan and you just have a haste set, then every single Clearcast proc, you can do the double dip method that I talked about in previous videos every single time you get a Clearcast. So instead of sometimes using it when you're about to go in, potentially, I haven't tested it, but you would use it every single Clearcast. And then the last point I will talk about is haste breakpoints for global GCD cap. So with all this haste, since your gear and your trinket proc will give you around 20% haste, you cannot use Icy Veins during Heroism, because you're going to hit the GCD cap, because yeah, you're going to be 20% over. Even with 0 haste, you won't hit the GCD cap under Icy Veins Heroism, but now you will. So this is just proof that that is the case. Same thing, he used Icy Veins during the Heroism, and as you can see from the timestamps, he can only start his cast every 1 second because of the GCD, but he finishes it faster than 1 second. So he's losing, because he used Icy Veins, he kind of has to sit there and spell Q for, like 0.15 seconds. So this is a mistake, don't do that. Now he knows, now he'll do better. So those are my updates and thoughts on Arcane Mages. If you have any questions, put them in the comments, and I'll get to them. Thanks.